thank you everyone for coming this Wednesday evening to our May ACM Chicago webinar and IEEE Computer Society Chicago webinar, and also Mid-America Club IT Connect. So hope that you're all doing great. And yeah, hopefully, with things going in the right direction, we may have a in-person meeting maybe before the end of this year, or maybe in the fall, we will see. So let's hope for the best on that. All right, so just a little bit of introductions. So my name is Alvin Chin. I am the chair of ACM Chicago, the vice chair of Mid-America Club IT Connect, and the chair of IEEE Computer Society Chicago. A little bit about IEEE Computer Society Chicago. So it's the Chicago chapter of the IEEE Computer Society, which is similar to ACM Chicago, but a different organization. So we hold meetings, actually not quarterly now, more like monthly now since the pandemic. Monthly meetings on topics that deal with software, hardware, computing, AI, big data, cloud computing, cybersecurity, and anything that deals with computers. So here is our website, Facebook, Twitter, that you can follow us, LinkedIn. We have our previous recordings that are put onto the YouTube channel. So if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you will be able to find previous recordings as well as the latest recordings too as well. If you want to become an IEEE Computer Society member, you can also join there and get discounts, for various, publications or conferences and different materials. Second of all, I'd like to welcome members from the Mid-America Club IT Connect group. So if you're not familiar with Mid-America Club, it's a private business club in Chicago. It's in the 80th floor of the Aon building. And we've actually had previous in-person meetings at the Mid-America Club. I believe our last one we did was February of last year, before the pandemic started. Basically it's a club that basically just like ACM and IEEE Computer Society deals with the same similar types of topics. So that's why we decided to do joint webinars, meetings together. And if you want to know more information, you can go to the website, Facebook, and Instagram located there. And of course, welcome to all the members of ACM Chicago. So those who don't know, we are the Chicago chapter of the Association for Computing Machinery. So similar to kind of like IEEE. We do monthly meetings with different computing topics. So we've done stuff with, big data, AI, machine learning, supercomputing, cybersecurity, things like that. So I am the chair, Alvin Chin, and we have Mark Temkin. So Mark is the vice chair. Can you see there? And then we have our treasurer, Greg Newmark. If you want to follow us, we have our website, chicagoacm.org. We post our meetings on the meetup page, so you can join our meetup if you haven't already. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course, we also post our archived meetings and webinars on YouTube. And again, if you want to become an ACM member, you can go to acm.org/membership. Housekeeping rules. If you're not speaking for the panelists, please mute yourself and to turn off your camera. The rest of the other attendees will not be able to use the camera or to speak. We will have our talk first, and then after that, we will have a question and answer. If you have a question for Nate, please type it in the Q&A, and Mark will go ahead and go through those questions and answer them. And yes, a copy of these slides and also Nate's slides will be made available after this webinar, as well as a copy of the video recording. All right, and I'm going to now invite Mark, our vice chair, to introduce our speaker. So Mark, go ahead.
Let's have a warm welcome for Nate Nichols of Narrative Science for our second NLP presentation this year on No More Dashboards, why employees aren't using data and what to do about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark and Alvin. And thanks everybody for spending some time with me tonight, or spending some time with us tonight. I hope this is a, just a nice, casual, and hopefully interesting conversation here. I think I'm just going to steal somebody's screen sharing. All right, can everybody see this? All right, I'm going to operate with the assumption that, okay, awesome, thanks. Thanks for coming. We're going to talk about No More Dashboards. I'm Nate Nichols, Chief Scientist at Narrative Science. The outline for the talk today is a pretty standard outline, I think, for this kind of talk. I'm going to talk about the problem that we're trying to solve at Narrative Science, our solution at a high level, which is more kind of probably more for a general audience, and then our solution in some more detail for folks like us who are into computing machinery, and that'll be more of the kind of technical stuff, how it works, and I'm definitely happy to go deeper on that at the end of the talk as well. Quick bio from me. I got my PhD in computer science from Northwestern in 2010. My thesis was called machine generated content. So it's all about how do we have a machine that knows something about you and can create some piece of content for you that you really love. So it could be a news show, it could be a movie it makes for you, creating something for you based on what the machine knows about you, mostly by sort of cobbling together different things it finds online. So that was my grad school work. I then started at Narrative Science right out of grad school. I was actually I spent the whole last year of grad school trying to become a professor. I really wanted to be a teaching professor. And then there was a journalism position opened up at Medill School of Journalism, fantastic school at Northwestern. And I had done some work with them because of my the sort of idea of creating a news show. So I sort of knew the folks at Medill, and they were trying to bring in more technical professors. And so I spent all this time trying to get this job there, and then spent a couple of weeks at Narrative Science over the summer and completely switched my life track around, and have now been at Narrative Science for almost 11 years coming up here. Originally as an engineer, so I helped build a lot of our first few versions of our core technology. Now I'm chief scientist, and if you're like me, and until I got this job, you have no idea what a chief scientist actually does. And so for me, at least the way I'm a chief scientist in narrative science, it's a really fun role, frankly. I don't write any code anymore, which I miss every once in a while, but I still get to work a lot with engineers and our prod dev team in general, particularly on more sort of kind of thornier, deeper questions about how we're going to model something, how we're going to represent something, how we want to conceptualize some piece of the architecture or the system. So I get to do a lot of internal work around that, and then I get to do more external work like this and talk about the problem we're trying to solve and our approach to AI and that kind of stuff with folks like you. So it's a really fun job for me, and I get to sort of work both the more technical and the kind of softer side of my brain. So we wanted to start with the problem. Here it is, written out. The problem that we're trying to solve in neuroscience is that we, as a people, as a community, we act like business users are going to use BI dashboards to become more data-driven, but in reality, they do not, right? And this disconnect between what we expect and what we act like and what happens in reality is the cause of much pain today. And just quick definitions: business users. When I say business users, I'm thinking basically of people who sort of work in a job but aren't analysts, right? They don't have data or analytics in their title. They work in marketing, they work in customer success or customer support, they work in sales, they work in engineering, they work in HR. People that want to be making good decisions, they want to be informed by what the data is saying, but they're not analysts. That's not their data, is not their day job. And BI dashboards, I think probably everybody knows this, but this is, Tableau, Click, Power BI, MicroStrategy, Amazon QuickSight. There's a ton of these. Someone sets up a bunch of charts and graphs for you. You can look at them and you can like filter or click on things or sort of dig around through those dashboards. And so this is the problem here, right? And if we break this down into a couple of sub-problems, what we're trying to solve, the first one, we act like business users will use BI dashboards to become more data-driven. This is really the vision and the promise and how BI dashboards have been sold for the last probably 5 or 10 years. Initially, they were for analysts. When Tableau came out 20 years ago, it was really targeted at analysts. It's a great tool for analysts. But as we've all sort of have gotten onto this idea that everybody should be making data-driven decisions, and as we're spending a ton of money holding on to data and we're expecting to get value out of it, we really want everybody making these decisions. And we think BI dashboards are what's going to do that. This is a quote I pulled off Tableau yesterday or the day before. And this is the kind of thing that people want to believe and these companies sell on. We totally fell in love with Tableau and the promises that you have to offer actionable or readily available data that everybody can consume, not only the analysts and the power users, but everybody in an organization, right? So this is someone who bought Tableau with the full expectation that everybody in an organization is going to be using these dashboards to make better decisions, right? So this is the way we act, but in reality, this isn't what happens, right? And there's a quote and a stat here from Gartner last year. Business people still struggle to know which insights to act on because the insights they get from these dashboards are not contextualized, easily consumable, or actionable by the majority of users. So business users are supposed to be using these tools, but in practice, they're still really struggling, which leads to a stat of 65% of employees report they're not getting the insights in the way that they need it. And so they end up making decisions that are not rooted in data, right? So we have this vision that we're going to buy Tableau or we're going to get Power BI, whatever it is. And now everybody's going to be able to use all this great data we have, all these powerful tools to make these data-driven decisions. And 65% of the people say, yeah, it's not really working for me, 2/3. And same, and the quote sort of backs it up as well. It's not contextualized, it's not consumable. And so this disconnect, like I said, causes a lot of pain, right? And it causes two kinds of pain. You can see I also have an art degree. I'm flexing here on the right. Not really. But there's two kinds of pain that this disconnect is causing today. And the first is organizational pain. There's a lot of friction and frustration and stress within organizations. And here, just a quote or a stat here, only 31% of people say their company is actually data-driven. I think this is CEOs. 31% of CEOs say their company is actually data-driven. This is in 2019, and that number fell from 37% in 2017, right? Last year, $20 billion were spent on BI, and much of that money was spent with the idea that business users are going to get a ton of value out of this. The company is going to see a bunch of value because everybody's going to be in the data all the time. And we can see that those numbers are actually, those trends are going in the wrong way, at least as CEOs are saying. So there's a lot of organizational pain. And I think more importantly, or more sort of, more kind of pulling on the heartstrings, right, is there's a lot of personal pain. And I talk to a lot of people, a lot of analysts, a lot of analytics leaders, a lot of business users, and there is a lot of personal pain being suffered. And that it shows up in a lot of different ways. It shows up in business users whose eyes are all cracked and bloodshot. They're crying because every Sunday evening they want to hang out with their family, but instead they have to flip through 30 dashboards and copy and paste and try to build out this set of bullets that they send to their boss and has to be on the boss's desk every morning by Monday, or every Monday at 8 a.m. Right? So there's pain being felt there doing this repetitive, boring work because somebody else in the organization doesn't know how to use the tools. There's pain from the deeply bored analysts, right? Who maybe have a data science degree, they have analytics backgrounds, they have a lot of training, they know how to use the tools. They're excited to come in and really dig into the data. And instead they spend their time just sort of answering basic questions that people should have been able to figure out for themselves, right? They spend all their time tracking down why one dashboard says there were 30 deals closed last week and the other one said 28, and where are those other two coming from? Or they spend a lot of time building out a dashboard that has all this great information and people keep emailing them or Slacking them or texting them or WhatsApping them. And they have to spend all this time doing this really boring stuff that they're overqualified and overtrained for. Pain is felt by people who have a lot of anxiety that they think they're the only ones who doesn't really get what's happening in the dashboard, and they live their professional lives with this nightmare of their boss calling them out in some meeting or some one-on-one going off the rails because there was some nugget, there was some insight, there was something valuable there that they weren't able to extract themselves. And finally, there's a lot of pain from analytics leaders, right, who put a lot of skin in the game. They spend a lot of their own credibility bringing in some new tool, growing their team, whatever that is. A lot of money gets spent, and still 65% of people say it's not really working for them, right? And so now these guys, they're doing everything they can. Everybody wants the same thing. Everybody's working hard and working on the same side, but the reality isn't matching that. So there's pain all around. And it's not supposed to be this way. right? And it's because BI dashboards are technology, and technology is amazing, and we know that. And we have sort of a set of expectations around how technology improves. How does it grow? How does it advance? And there's this nice kind of value cycle down here, right? So we start with increased investment. People start spending more money. Some of the thing grows and it becomes more usable. Yeah, and this works for, we can do this for just personal computing in general. Personal computing starts up, or computing in general, starts up in late 40s, early 50s. More money is being spent, and usability starts improving. We start having, we move from vacuum tubes to transistors, and punch cards to, I guess, whatever else came after punch cards, a little before my time. And then we move from mainframes to desktops, to laptops, to phones, right? And this usability keeps improving. And as it happens, there's more usage, right? There's more people computing now than there's ever been in the history of mankind, right? And we all spend more of our own time each day on that. So usage increases because all of a sudden new people can use the technology, and the people who are already using it start using it more. And from all of that extra usage, then there's a lot of value that starts being created. And then that value fuels further investment, right? And so if we do sort of, this is going to be the closest example I have to actual sorts of charts and graphs in this talk. Still no labels anywhere, but it looks kind of like this, right? Investment keeps going up. Or if you think of cell phones, say, right, on usability, comes out, you have to talk, there's those big honking phones we all love to make fun of in the 80s, and then all of a sudden, hey, it starts getting a little better. We get some of those Nokias, and all of a sudden, wow, that form factor really changes. Now we've got Motorola's, now we've got iPhones, now we've got whatever's coming next. And this usability tends to increase sort of like this. It's a little more of a stair-steppy kind of function, right? There's a little bit of progress, there's sort of iteration, and if you've read The Innovator's Dilemma, there's a lot of charts in that book that look like this. There's some incremental progress that gets made, and then there's a sea change. There's a new paradigm that opens up, and all of a sudden usability can jump dramatically, right? We go from the command line to graphical interface. We go from graphical interface to a touch interface. We go from touch interface to Siri and Alexa or whatever's coming next. There's those huge spikes and big paradigm shifts in usability, which, like I said, keeps driving increased usage, drives increased value and investment, and on and on. And we get all these nice sort of exponential growths. And this is the way it looks for a lot of technology, right? For computing in general, for cell phones, video games look like this. A lot of medical devices look like this. We see this kind of pattern over and over again. But we haven't seen it with BI dashboards, right? And sort of how business users consume data in general. We have definitely seen increased investment. It grows the BI industry, $20 billion this year. It grows 12% every year. By 2025, they're predicting it's going to be a $40 billion industry, right? So the investment is going up dramatically. And the usability has definitely improved, right? If you imagine sort of here, before we started doing data, this is businesses back 80 years ago, or maybe 100 years ago, when they were operating mostly by intuition. And then we started keeping records, and we had some sort of basic analysis. And then we started having analytics teams, and we could start doing occasional reporting, or maybe this is dashboards here. But then we haven't really seen much past that, right? This is the actual trajectory we're on with BI dashboards, and with how business users consume business information to make better decisions, right? We haven't seen those other kind of paradigm shifts. It's just regular incremental kind of boring usability improvements. And so we're not seeing the exponential growth we really want to see in usage. I said 65% of people aren't getting data in the way that they want to. It turns out like 30%, the inverse of 65, roughly 30% is kind of the ceiling for a lot of these things. You can get about 30% of your company to pay attention to data, to pay attention to dashboards. It's really hard to get it any higher than that. It's really hard to get dashboards looked at by more than about 30% of the people. So this usage kind of max out. There's an asymptote here, and so from the slowly growing usability and slowly growing usage, we see the same kind of value, slowly growing value, right? We're not seeing the ROI we expect to in all these huge investments we're making. If we sort of double click on that last one a little bit, this is the path that we would be on when we think about business users will use BI dashboards to become more data driven. we keep seeing this sort of value go up and up and up, but that's not what we're seeing because they don't, right? Yeah, they don't. And we'll talk about ways people have tried to get them to do it. And it turns out none of those ways kind of work. But we'll talk about that in a second. And so then this difference, this delta, this disconnect here, this area between where we want to be and where we act like we should be, and we think we should be, and the reality, and this is all the pain that's being caused today. And you may kind of, like, this may kind of hit you a little bit weird, right? Because it feels like we're in this golden age of data. It doesn't feel like there's a ton of pain being experienced everywhere, or it doesn't have to feel like that. And in many ways, we are in a golden age of data, right? And if we look at, this is sort of a loose representation of what a typical BI stack looks like. There's some movement happening around here with snowflakes and some things like it. But roughly, we have the data lake that holds on to all of our data as it comes in, we capture it. Here we do a bunch of, ETL, extract, transform, load. We do machine learning, a lot of analysis, all kinds of good stuff happens here. We get it into a data warehouse where it's ready to be served to somebody. We put dashboards on top of that, and then our business users consume those dashboards. So this is kind of a generic but plausible architecture, and this is sort of how it works with regards to money, right? We have to spend money on all of these 4 bottom stacks. We have to buy data lakes and technologies, or rent them, or get them through cloud providers, whatever that is. We have to do all this ML and analysis, and obviously, SageMaker and GPT-3 and deep learning, and there's all kinds of really exciting things happening here. But it all costs money, and hiring the people that knows how to do it costs money. We got to pay for the data warehouse. We got to pay and buy the dashboard tools. But the idea here is that there's enough data and information and insights and analysis and all that good stuff flowing up, so that by the time we get to the business users, now they're making way better decisions, right? And so all that money, all that value is coming back, and this whole process has made money for the organization, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to spend money here on these bottom 4 boxes, make money at the top, and have it all work out to be a positive ROI. So this is the ideal. This is what everybody wants to have happen. And then the problem is this is the reality, right? We've got down here, there's amazing things happening. BigQuery and Snowflake and Fivetran and dbt, and there's so much innovation and excitement and cool things happening and people interested in this space that these 3 boxes are just killing it, right? It's genuinely, I'm really hyped about everything, all the work that's going on there. But then it still has to get through this dashboards before it actually provides value, right? We're just spending money here. It's really fun money to be spending on, or to be spending. It's really cool things we're buying. It's really neat. But the way we actually get this money out, it has to go through this really skinny path, right? You can sort of think of these as, these are like 12-lane interstates, right? With exits and cars coming and going. And it's super powerful, and you can move around a ton of trucks. And then there's like a bumpy 2-lane country road to actually deliver what's in those trucks to the business users, right? And so it's this last mile that's really holding us back, and we're not seeing nearly the ROI that we want to out of this whole sort of BI stack as a whole. And there are things that we've tried to do here, right? One thing that a lot of people have tried is, hey, we're going to do, this is true. Our business users don't use dashboards, but that's because they don't have the right training in the tools. We haven't, we got to have another couple offsites to make sure people really understand that we want them to be data driven. We just got to hire better people. We need to hire a bunch of kids that just came out of college and are all up on this data stuff. Whatever that is, trying to kind of force this lane higher, this lane wider, to let more of the value come out. And it really hasn't worked, right? You can get people to change their behavior for a week or 2 maybe, but then all those numbers regress back to 30% or whatever the number is for that particular org. So it's a worthwhile thing to try, and training and managing and leading and all that kind of good stuff. It's a great idea, and it just hasn't worked out. People have been trying this for 5 years and they haven't cracked it. And the other approach that we've seen a lot is we're just going to hire 1 million analysts, right? Maybe not every insight needs to go through a dashboard. We'll hire a ton of analysts that can pull that information directly and take it straight to the business users. Or we'll pair every business user with their own personal analyst, and we'll do it. We'll just kind of brute force it. And I think, like, conceptually that probably could work, but in practice it doesn't. The analysts are really expensive. There aren't enough of them. Just it doesn't, you can't sort of hire away from this problem. And so for us, the way we're to shift now from the problem we're trying to solve to our particular solution, we're really getting rid of this dashboard phase, right? We think this is really a poison pill for trying to get business users to actually understand what's happening in the data and become more data driven. If the answer, we got to find some way, because dashboards haven't worked, and they haven't worked for the last 5 or 10 years. No one has figured out how to get them working. Let's just stop expecting them to work for business users, right? Business users don't like them. They show us that by never going into these tools. So let's come up with something else. And it turns out there is a better way to actually get people to understand and act on data. It's not charts and graphs, it's something called data stories. And this is not, narrative science, we talk about data stories a lot. It's not our thing. This is a thing out there in the world. You can read about them. Gartner, the analysts, know a lot about them. And I have just a couple of examples here to anchor what we're sort of talking about here, with this one with this nice, these nice kind of bubble charts, I guess you would call that. This is a thing called Why Do Cats and Dogs? And it's a really fun way of exploring Google's autocomplete suggestions. So if you go to Google and you type in why do dogs, Google has a bunch of suggestions based on what other people have searched, right? And so this particular data story is a nice interactive one that lets you figure out and sort of explore all the other suggestions Google's surfacing as a way of kind of getting at the zeitgeist of cat and dog owners and what questions are really on their minds. And turns out a lot of questions about why dogs are licking different things is what I found when spending some time with that data story. There's another one, nice here from New York Times. You probably know the New York Times does a lot of great stuff with data and data storytelling. This is one example I saw that I really liked about living on the minimum wage. So, you can choose your state and it tells you what the minimum wage is, and you start setting different expenses and you get this nice visualization of, hey, how much rent can you actually afford to spend? What can your grocery bill be? That kind of stuff if you're going to try to live on minimum wage. And then this one over here, we'll talk more about later, but this is a data story for someone within a company like Airbnb, learning about how much people are actually renting and how much they're generating from those rentals in a particular month. And so this is data stories at the sort of intuitive example level, but there's a real definition, that a commonly accepted definition for data storytelling. But data stories really have 3 different components, right? The first is visualizations. This is the sort of charts and graphs or more creative things that we all know and love. So there's a visualization component. There's a narrative component, which is text that's kind of explaining what's happening in that chart or visualization. This is more of kind of, if you go up to it, if your CEO comes over to an analyst and says, hey, walk me through what I'm seeing here, right? That's the kind of bluff people say when they don't understand what a dashboard is saying. They're like, I get it, but just walk me through what you see here. The types of things the analyst would say, or the person who knows that dashboard, that's really what that narrative is, right? They're calling out certain things that are interesting. They're talking about drivers. They're talking about what it means for the future, why things happened. All of that kind of actual narrative content is a part of a data story. And then finally, there's additional context. And in particular, what you can call extra data context. It's context that's not in the data, right? And so sometimes this can be things like, hey, the data says, so-and-so didn't close any deals last week. And then the context that's not in the data is that so-and-so was sick all last week, right? They got the second vaccine and it knocked them out for a week. That's the kind of context, that's the kind of information that people know that it just isn't in the data, right? And so you also need that in the mix to make sure you're not, sort of just over-indexing on exactly what can be represented in the database and losing that more, just the human side and the additional information and knowledge that we bring to bear. So these are the 3 components of a data story. And again, data stories are, they're proven, there's studies around this. They're a better way to get people to understand and act on data, particularly people that aren't super quantitative, aren't probably like most of us here on the call, the types of people that don't have data or analysts anywhere in their job title. Data stories are understood to be the best way to communicate with them. And so for us, the problem with data stories is, if you look at this, it's kind of a lot to put together, right? You got to write this whole thing. This takes a while. So the way a human would typically do this you spend a while clicking around on a dashboard, you try and figure that out. Maybe you're looking some with the dashboard, maybe some with some other tool, you're copying and pasting things around, you're kind of saving a little workbook on the side as you're piecing things together. Then you sit down to write the narrative around that, checking against any additional context. You might ask people to how to bring some of this in. And creating these data stories, when you're done, it's a pretty effective way of communicating, but they're a real pain to put together, and they take a while, right? And that's why we don't see more of these. It's certainly historically been a lot easier to just focus on this visualization part and expect people to do all this kind of stuff just in their head. But again, that's hard. They don't really have the skills for it. It takes a long time, so they tend not to do it. So for us, the answer was, hey, we're going to automate data storytelling. We're going to use computers and AI, and in particular, natural language generation, which is a subfield of natural language processing. And natural language generation, as it sounds like, is the idea of computers generating language for people, right? And so for us, the way we do automated data storytelling, there's a lot of different, we've done different versions of this and different sort of use cases we've targeted, but they've all looked something like this. We build some piece of NLG, customers' data comes into the system, as well as some intent of what is the user actually looking for in this case. For some of our products, this has been super detailed, right? The way the intent was specified results in a 5-page report coming out, and it's a PDF, and there's charts and visualizations in just the right place, and every word is exactly right. That's one way of doing the intent. We've really moved more towards having them be closer to like a business question, like how were sales last week, or can you break down ad spend by campaign? Like that kind of stuff, that the types of questions that business people think in. That's really how we're modeling intents now. So that's what goes into our NLG system, and a data story is what comes out. And so narrative science has been in business for 11 years now. And we've done, everything we've done has been sort of this kind of shape of things. And it's been great. We've done a lot of fun things. We've made a lot of customers and people happy, and that's awesome. But really what we realized was that this is only part of the puzzle. This is only part of what's needed to really to make sure we're trying to get business users to make those data-driven decisions, data-driven conversations, all that good stuff. And this is kind of the healthy part of that, right? Like you need to present the information in a way that's consumable to them, that makes sense to them, and resonates with them. But there's this whole other part that you need as well, and that's where we've been focusing our energies, or we sort of now have been taking on both things. Where we're continuing to do automated data storytelling, and this is always going to be something we work on doing a better job of. But we've also have built out an engaging modern user experience, right? And if you think about all the ways you consume information throughout the day, if you're like me, I try to be good about not being on social networks too much. But a lot of what I do is things like LinkedIn, Reddit, Apple News, Twitter, even other news sites, and they all feel like they have a kind of similar feel to them. And none of them feel like a dashboard, right? None of them feel like, okay, oh my God, here we go. I'm going to sit at my desktop computer. I'm going to bring this thing up full screen, and I'm going to spend a lot of time really digging into this. That's just not how people tend to consume information today. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted a place where people actually came in and looked at these stories every day. And to do that, we had to crib a lot from the engaging experiences that we all use every day today. And so you can see the sort of, not really a word cloud, but sort of a word cloud on the right. These are the things that we've learned from Twitter and Reddit and Apple News and everything else that is really good at having and holding on to users. So this is kind of a bunch of bullets, which really boils up to these 3 big points on the left. We knew it had to be simple. The experience of it had to be simple. It had to be personal, and it had to be proactive, right? And these really aren't related to automated data storytelling, but this is what the experience has to be like to get people spending time in the system, to spending time reading those data stories so that they can go do a better job with their jobs. And so you'll see, I'll show you a demo here in just a second. You'll see there's recommendations and a follow model, and it works great on mobile, and it's all personalized, and there's a news feed, and it pushes to you, and all this kind of stuff we've learned, we've tried to build into this app. And so we'll go to the demo now. So this is a product we have now called Lexio, and I'm not going to do a whole sales demo at all, but I want to ground it a little bit at what I'm talking about and show you what this looks like in practice. So this is a business user coming into the system. This is what a normal user would see. You can see there's a lot of text, first of all, and I'll show you more of that in a second, but this is some of our automated data storytelling. Here it's talking about bookings being up last month, along with some driver information. I see immediately how this compares to the goals. Here, Lexio, like we talked about, to make this engaging experience, Lexio knows what's important to me, and so it's trying to tell me about those things. And it's trying to draw my attention to things that it thinks are important and I would care about. So we call these notable insights. So here on the left, these are the topics that I'm following. This is sort of like following someone on Twitter or following a news source on Apple News. And based on what Lexio knows I'm interested in here and these different KPIs at the top, that's what Lexio is looking for these notable insights. And so it's saying, hey, the number of leads in May is higher than usual. New pipeline is also doing well, both for the enterprise sales team and for all sales performance. These are all getting nice thumbs ups because Lexio knows that these are good. If I look for red flags, we're also losing more opportunities than we're used to. I guess we're just losing a lot of opportunities in different places. And I'll show you one more thing. If I click into this story, so that's the kind of the newsfeed experience, and that works great on mobile and pushes notifications to you and all that good stuff. And then if I click on one of those, this is sort of the full automated data storytelling navigation experience here. And so this is more of a full story, talking about bookings, and you can see it's calling out a lot of the things that matter to business users. It's not jargony. None of this had to be set up. This is Lexio and it's AI, and I'll talk about more how this works in a second, but trying to do its best to write for me and what it knows I'm interested in. And so it's talking about bookings. They're made up of 9 deals, the average per deal. How are we tracking to the goal? How does this compare to historical, same time last month or this time last year? The biggest drivers of this is something everybody always wants to know. It's one thing to know sales are going up or down, but what's causing that? So Lexio is doing some driver analysis here, both from a component perspective and a formula perspective. And then just to do one more thing here, you can see what to read next. This is Lexio recommending to me, hey, if you're interested in this, here are some other things you might be interested in. So you might want to break down bookings, for instance, by salesperson. And if I explore that, Lexio goes and just writes me another story right away. And so I can continue exploring, continue pulling threads that are interesting to me. I don't lose track of where I was. I can share this stuff. There's all kinds of cool stuff happening here. But this is how we're thinking about that new experience for business users. So this is kind of our solution here. And let me go back into the thing. Yeah, so now that's the problem we're solving for. This idea that business users, we think they're going to use dashboards, they don't. It sucks for everybody. We've given up on getting them to use dashboards. We think we have a better idea. It's data storytelling, but to do that, the kind of scale is needed. You really need some AI to do that. You got to get it automated, otherwise it takes too long to build them. So that's our solution to it. But now I want to double click on that solution for the folks here, the more technical audience, and talk about where the stories are coming from and how we do things. So this is one of the big decisions we had to make. That was a pretty easy one for us. But when you think about NLG now and NLP, you might very well have heard of things like GPT-3, these really big transformer models, right? BERT, I saw Google just announced a new one yesterday, Lambda, that is I think it's trained on conversation and dialogue in particular. So these are really big, super impressive deep learning models. And this absolutely one way of doing NLG, right? So if you have a chance to play with GPT-3, you should. It's super cool. I know the speaker last month was talking about using GPT-2 for a lot of the research she was doing. It's great. And so I consider that all representation light or even representation free, right? The way those systems are built are, here is all of the text from the internet plus a bunch of other text, figure out how to predict missing words. And from that, these systems get really good at sort of completing prompts you give them, right? But they don't really know what they're saying. They don't really care about language. They're trying to predict the next word. And a lot of things they're awesome for. So they're great when you need to be domain agnostic, right? No matter what kind of email you're sending, Gmail will probably do a pretty good job of suggesting, completing sentences for you or suggesting openings or closings. And so it's domain agnostic. They're not explainable, right? And we've all sort of have heard or experienced the horror stories of some of these, sort of chat bots that immediately become anti-Semitic or sexist or start just kind of spewing out garbage. And it's hard to understand why these systems are doing that. Even when they're not spewing out garbage, when they're super impressive and working really well, you can't really open them up and understand quite why they're working so well, right? They're not really explainable, which is totally reasonable for some use cases. And they're also, they're not true, right? Or they don't really care about being true. GPT-3, you can give it math problems and it will answer the math problems, and the answers aren't right? It's predicting what it thinks the answer would be based on what it's read on the internet. And the internet doesn't include a lot of math problems, right? It doesn't actually understand mathematics or arithmetic or anything. It's just trying to trying to fill in the blanks, right? And so then it does a really good job of it, but it's only probabilistically true. And for us, this not explainable, this probabilistically true in particular are real deal breakers, right? We have Lexio's writing stories about what's happening in your business data so that you can make decisions for your business, and it has to be true, right? It has to be accurate. It has to understand why it's saying things for people to trust it. And so for us, we've taken a more representation heavy approach where we're domain specific. Lexio cannot write poetry or movie scripts or greeting cards or books, couplets, haikus, none of that, limericks, none of that stuff it can write, right? But it can write stories about your business data. And so we built it to do that one particular thing. It's domain specific, but obviously for us, that's the domain we care about. And it's not domain specific in the sense that it only works for retail or healthcare. It works for any kind of BI data, but it's always in that BI space. It is explainable. Lexio knows why it's doing the things it's doing and knows why it's saying things. It knows sort of when it made the decision to do that and what database query it executed to come up with that number. It knows all of that. And so we can guarantee the stories are accurate outside of bugs, obviously. But when Lexio says you have 12 deals last week, you had 12 deals last week. At least your data said you had 12 deals last week. And so to do the work it's doing, Lexio is using 4 different models, and these are sort of models in the more classic AI sense. They're kind of models of part of the world. These aren't ML models. These are actual knowledge that Lexio uses about the world to try and simulate parts of the world to write these stories. And there's 4 models in Lexio. The first is the authoring graph, and this is our model of BI, right? So we've been doing this for a long time, like I said, and so we have a pretty good sense of when someone asks how a metric was in a recent time frame, they probably care about just the number. You know, if somebody says, how were sales last week? They might want to know that you had $150,000 in sales last week. But they also care about how is that compared to the week before? Is that going up or going down? How are we on track to hit our quarterly goal based off that? Is there any outliers or things to be worried about? Is it that we closed 150 grand a deal, but like 145 of that was from one deal? Otherwise, we would have missed things entirely. Yeah, all that other types of information that they really want to know as part of that answer. And so for us, we have this graph where we represent all these different questions and sub-questions as nodes in this graph. And Lexio at runtime, when it's actually writing these stories, is essentially instantiating these graphs with these different questions. For each of those questions, it knows how to execute analysis against the data, pull it to actually get the answer to that, to try and figure out how interesting and relevant that answer is to a particular user, and then decide which of those answers to express in the story. So this authoring graph is really our model of BI and what people mean when they ask particular questions. Our ontology is Lexio's model of the real world. So if you get Lexio, it knows about a lot of things already. It knows about revenue and bookings and salespeople and ad campaigns and HR departments and dates and regions and locations. We have all that knowledge built in, right? And we know a couple different things about these different, we call them entity types in our ontology. We know how to talk about them. So we know how to say, salesperson and salespeople. We also know how to talk about them in different contexts. So we can say, your highest performing salesperson, that kind of stuff. But we also have what we call logical metadata around these things as well. And so one of the things that Lexio is good at, if you said, hey, how was Google's stock price last week? One thing that no one should do is sum up the stock price at the end of each day and say, last week Google's total stock price was $4,000. Right? Stock prices are not something that you sum up like that. It's not that kind of number, right? And Lexio knows that, because it knows, hey, for stock prices, we have a little flag that says, is this the kind of thing that you sum? And no, it's not, right? And so when Lexio is writing these stories, it's making sure that the analysis it's doing, depending on what's in the data, the types of things in the data, and how they relate to one another, it's making sure that the analysis is doing is reasonable and correct and meaningful. We have a model of language, which is, for us, is controlling things like, when do you use pronouns? And how long ago could you have referred to that thing before you're no longer allowed to refer to it as it, and you have to restate the thing? How do you talk about dates? Do you say last week, or do you say the date or the week beginning March or May 7th? All those types of decisions are made by our language model. And then finally, what we call business context, which is really the model of our organization, or each of our customers' organizations. Yeah, and just sort of in the interest of time, I'm going to click through this a bit briefly so we have time for questions. So in general, the way these models get used in Lexio is there's some feature within Lexio. Okay, yeah, sorry. So we have this idea of knowledge and judgment in the system, right? And so models are on the knowledge side. They're things that are true, or Lexio believes to be true. But when and how to apply those things is a softer decision, right? So Lexio from the authoring graph knows that, hey, these questions are related to each other. And if a person is interested in question A, they might also be interested in question B. And we can say that that's a true statement. They might be. And then the judgment is determining, hey, but in this case, is this particular person interested in this particular answer? That's really kind of the judgment's call whether or not to include that piece of content in the story. And so we have these two, for each of these models, we have this idea of knowledge and judgment, and both of these are always improving. For knowledge, we can enter, we add new things to the ontology, we create new nodes in the authoring graph. Eventually tech partners will be able to do this. We've done some fun experimentation with, we don't want to have NLP push, pure NLP push into here, because we really want this to be true and have somebody look at it, but using like a human in the middle or a human in the loop kind of thing to have a human approve this, pulling in information from third-party knowledge bases to grow the knowledge. And on the judgment side, we typically kind of seed Lexio's judgment with our kind of heuristics, but really this gets better through either NLP or existing documentation. What do people talk about at this company? Can you give us a lot of your existing reporting, or run that into Lexio? And now Lexio, when it writes stories for you, it'll write more like you typically write in your company, things like that. And from our actual users, helps drive the judgment a lot. One of this is implicit feedback. Just like every website or experience, we know what people are clicking on and how long they're spending on the site, and when they go back and forth and when they leave, all of that kind of stuff, as well as more explicit judgment, where it's just someone saying, this wasn't helpful to me, or don't show me more like this, that kind of stuff. And then just to wrap up super quick, because I'm out of time and I want to hear questions. This is kind of the marketecture for Lexio. These are our 4 models at the top. These are the 4 phases of how Lexio actually writes a story. So there's obviously a lot of Lexio that's not included here in this architecture, but this is how story writing happens. First, Lexio does the exploration. It decides what to say. A lot of that involves actually doing analytics against the customer's data. So coming out of exploration, Lexio knows everything that's going to go into the story. Then it outlines that. It turns it in from a graph of ideas and how they relate to one another into an actual outline. Lexio decides what's going to be in the headline and where the paragraph breaks and all that kind of good stuff. Then we do writing or realization. If you have some background in NLG, this is where we actually conjugate the verbs and pull in the different expressions and build the parse trees and do all that kind of good work. And then annotating is where we take the story and kind of link it up with other actions the user could perform. Like I said, Lexio keeps track of what it's talking about. So we know when we refer to an entity, we know what kind of entity that is. You can click on it and filter just to it, or you can click on somebody's name and send them a Slack message. All of that kind of stuff is attached here at the annotation phase. And yeah, thanks for your time. We're happy to answer questions. I'm super happy to talk offline as well. You can email me directly at Nichols and Nerd of Science. And I try to post on LinkedIn and I haven't been lately, but in general, I try to be active there. And if you search for Nate Nichols, I'm the one that looks like me on LinkedIn. So yeah, thanks for your time, and it's open for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Nate, for the wonderful presentation. So I think we have a couple of questions. So I will ask Mark to go ahead and go through them.
Sure. This is from Athena. Who are your closest competitors?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So on some things, there's one we get compared to a lot as a company called Automated Insights, and they do a lot of stuff like we used to do. So they, in particular, they have a dashboard integration that you can sort of drop their thing. We and their competitors of ours, we each have a thing where you can drop a sort of a widget onto a dashboard in Tableau, Click, Power BI, a lot of them. And what it'll do is write a little story about the chart you configure it with. So you can drop in a narrative science widget. It's called Quill. You point Quill at a chart and say, hey, write a story about this line chart. And Quill will do that. It'll talk about maxes and mins and when things cross each other and outliers and do all that kind of good stuff. And Automated Insights has a version of that that is more, if I remember right, it's more work to set up, but also has more sort of configuration options, I think. But for the more recent stuff like Lexio, it's really, our competitors are really the big BI companies. And we don't, so, Tableau, Click, Power BI, those guys. And we don't, I really like those companies for analysts, right? That's who those tools were built for initially. You can talk to a lot of really smart analysts that are awesome with these tools. They find tons of value. You watch them just sort of whiz through a dashboard and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing how sort of fluent and quick and adept they are with these tools, and they get a lot of value out of them. And that's lovely. And I think where we've gone wrong, and I think where, the opportunity, like I said, is trying to give that same experience to everybody who aren't analysts hasn't been working. And so we're trying to get some of those people that are unhappy, or either they're not using their BI licenses or they are, but they don't like it. That's who we're sort of targeting with Lexio, those users.
This is from Ben. How do you decouple a good customer, a good salesman, a good product from a good sales enablement material with a story?
Yeah, so how do you decouple those? Okay, so I think the question here is, so a company comes out with some product, they're making a lot of money off of it. It could be because they ran a great ad campaign and they got everybody to love it, even though the product isn't great. It could be the marketing wasn't good, but like the salespeople were awesome and they just crushed it, and that's what's causing the success. It could be sales and marketing didn't do much, but the product is just a miracle. So that's going to be super valuable. It could be some combination of those, and trying to differentiate those with data and with storytelling. And I think there's two things to say there. One is that one of the values that we see and we hear from people with Lexio is that it's a lot easier to get all your data in one place and to start, because we have that ontology and because we have the relationships, it's easier for us to start linking things together. Like we can say that, Lexio models pipelines, for instance. And so we know sort of what part of the pipeline is impacted by marketing, which part is impacted by sales, which part is, how is customer success impacted after they actually buy the product. So some of the analysis can come from things like Lexio by having more context and really more knowledge of what's happening in the data than typically you get with dashboards. And then there's also if that's a big question for your organization, that may not be a great fit for Lexio, right? Lexio is not like, hey, we need to decide whether we're going to we're going to expand into Asia for the first time. And it's going to be, if we decide, yes, we're going to spend $1 billion doing it, and it's going to be this huge initiative. And if not, we're not going to. But that's like a really big question, right? And you want real analysts on that. You want people diving into the data. You want to have this be sort of a whole process around figuring that out. And Lexio is not going to be the best tool for that. But those types of decisions are way more infrequent than, hey, should I call this customer again, or are they just going to churn? Should we do that? Should we extend that campaign for another week or two, or is it really not working? Am I going to end this quarter happy, or is my boss going to be yelling at me? What's going on with that team? Are they slacking, or does it just feel like that? Like those types of questions come up daily across an organization, and those are really the kinds of that more day-to-day kind of operational stuff is where we're targeting. It's at least where Lexio is able to provide a lot of value today. We obviously have big dreams of and big goals of Lexio just understanding more and more and being able to come up with these sorts of deeper insights on its own. But we think there's a lot we can do without sort of needing to solve these really big thorny issues like the example.
Greg, you had a question.
Yeah, so I was wondering when the Lexio writes a story, does it save it forever, or does it cache it, or does it just rewrite it anytime somebody clicks similar things? I guess you can share it, so I guess it must have a saved version of it if you share it. But other than that, does it keep it around?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's something we sort of have talked and thought a lot about. Like today in practice, you can totally share a story. When you do that, someone will get the static version of that story, the way it looks when you shared it. They'll get a link back to that story. And if they open that link a week later, the story may be different, right? The bookings this week's story, if you open it, the same URL, open it 2 weeks from now, it'll feel like a different story. At least the words will be different, the numbers will be different. And so that's a thing we sort of go around and around on of like, and so we're tackling commenting now. We've got, it's on internally, but not for our customers yet. But one of the kind of issues we have to deal with, like when you leave a comment on a story, what are you really commenting on? Are you commenting on that particular piece of static text that you saw right then? Or are you commenting on the idea of bookings last week? And that comment should sort of stick around or not, depending on kind of the type of commenting it is. And so this is it's a thorny issue for us. And there sort of it's not customers. One of the things we try to do, and hopefully you saw with the experience, is we want, as much as possible, we want to sort of feel like other tools, it's an app, you scroll through things, you can kind of flip through things. You can follow, you can click and hit left and move in and out of things. And so we try to use as many existing paradigms as we can, but one of the places that's tricky is like the sort of idea of what the story actually is, and when it's text and when it's something more living than that is a thing we sort of revisit occasionally. But so yeah, when we have a bunch of caching at different layers for performance reasons now, we have those old stories, but there isn't like a way. You can't open a story and say, show me that story I read 6 months ago. Like, I think we have that on database somewhere, but we don't expose it as a thing to pull up in the app today.
This is a question from Scott. Can you talk about the balance in making the right data available versus the engaging UX presentation of that data?
Yeah, we joke, it's another, everybody's asking good questions, the sort of things that are not resolved. Like we talk about the sort of the version of Lexio that is very clickbaity, right? It's like, you'll never believe this one weird trick that helps you close more deals, or like, your customers hate it when you learn this one thing, and sort of go full on that kind of route. And, we haven't talked seriously about doing that because it doesn't, I don't think it would work well. But that idea of trying to make it engaging is something we do take really seriously. And I, like I said, part of my job is more technical and part of it's more like this. And I'm kind of shameless about trying to make things engaging and trying to get it so people actually, spend time with what you're telling them, and they open themselves to it. And so for us, we're never going to go full kind of BuzzFeed listicle, that kind of world. But, we want people to be, and we think people want to be consuming this data, right? Like I feel good when I see something, I find some insight, and I'm like, yeah, and I can bring it up in a meeting, and people are like, oh wow, the data said that. It's like, yeah, that's what our users are doing in Lexio. Like, that feels really good to me. And I think everybody likes those moments. People like feeling confident. They like feeling good about their decisions. They like people sort of being like, oh, you know what you're talking about. And it's just the way we have now of getting to that is so painful that people don't spend much time in that space. And so we're never going to be, dishonest or sort of using those, I forget the name for those tactics, where you have kind of shady things where, the opt-out is white on white text, so nobody clicks at that kind of dark patterns. There we go. We're never going to do that for people, but we do want people to have fun with it. You saw the design. We've got these kind of fun characters around. We're trying to work more animations into the apps. So when you see good news, maybe there's little, fireworks or kind of sparkle, or some of these things that it can feel a little bit, maybe sort of silly or childish, or not like kind of serious data stuff, but this is what resonates with people. And we want people to be spending time in here. And so we need to be learning from where people spend their time, and sort of trying to give some of those same sort of like sparkly moments to people.
Okay, we have a two-part question. I can repeat it if we need, from Sharad. He's saying that the demo seems like it looks at internal data, but you mentioned external social media feeds. And he wants to know, where does the external data tie into the whole thing? Plus, is there not a lot of work to the ETL data from disparate company DBs into Lexio?
Yeah, so the first one is a confusion that I'm sure I introduced. We have social media-esque experiences, but there's nowhere that we're actually pulling external third-party data into Lexio today. We've talked about that in a couple different ways. Maybe we can link up with other data providers and we sort of augment your data or add things to your data, enrich your data, because we also have a bunch of stock price info, or we also have all this weather data or whatever that is. And we've talked about ways of incorporating that, but it's not something we do today. So when we're writing stories for someone, it's off their internal data. We've also have some public demos that, we wrote a story about like COVID vaccination, those kinds of things with publicly available data sets, but really the business is around internal data. And I'm sorry, what was the second question? I was going to remember it, Mark.
Oh, okay. Second question isn't there a lot of ETL work, ETL data from disparate company DBs into Lexio?
Yes, yeah, there is, but no more than there is with other tools. So with us, we try to do the things we're good at, which is this whole data storytelling and UX side of things. We don't have much to say about how you prepare your data for BI or how you manage it. If you remember the kind of 5-stack architecture, those bottom 3, we don't really have much to say there. And so with Lexio, we try to let you bring in data in a lot of different ways. We can connect to different cloud data warehouses. You can give us CSVs. You can upload things to S3. We have a lot of different ways of getting data in, but we don't support you or do any work for you of sort of pulling your different data together from different sources and getting it. We sort of expect you to get it to either one table or a few tables that have some understood relationships with each other. And once you get it to that spot, then Lexio can come over and step in and do its thing.
Okay, and our final audience question is, what do you do to incorporate specific domain knowledge into Lexio? In other words, a particular industry or a specific client's business. How far does it make sense to go?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that's, like I sort of mentioned this, early in narrative science, we were super specific. Our early products, we still sort of sell them. It's called authoring, but you could configure exactly what that system said in every conceivable instance. You could set up all these different conditions, and when it says this, say exactly these 6 words and put a comma here. And it was very, very configurable. And the mode we got into with Lexio is much less configuration and trying to err more on the sides of the system knowing things and being able to make its own good decisions. So we don't have sort of nearly the customization we had before, but we try to expose it in the right ways. And so we have things like that news feed, those notable insight cards. Those are popping up when Lexio thinks something's interesting, and you can tune all those thresholds if those are popping up, too much or too little for your org. And for things like different industries or different domains, we really rely there on that ontology again, and knowing those different flags and sort of what logically makes sense for the different entity types, but also using a lot of relationships, which I didn't talk much about. But Lexio also knows you can assert that, hey, these 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 entity types have a particular semantic relationship that you can really rely on, and you can express that in as a verb, and it comes out in the story. But also it's really there to power analysis. So Lexio can say things like, in the sales domain, it can say, hey, your sales are up, but your new pipeline is down dramatically, so that next quarter you may not be in as good a shape. But that exact same type of logic would work for a big HR department. Your hiring is way up this quarter, but you don't have many candidates for next quarter, so you're probably going to have a harder time filling all the open heads next quarter. It's the same kind of reasoning, it's the same kind of logic, but it's applied to a completely different domain. And so again, for Lexio, we're trying to build in as knowledge as many of those different types of relationships as we can, so that when the customer wants to use it for their particular industry or domain or vertical, they just have to kind of wire some things up, and then the rest of Lexio's intelligence is able to be applied.
Oh, I have a question, Nate. So the thing is that, yeah, it's true that many people are using those dashboards, and a lot of times in the business, right, the executives want to get an answer to a particular question. And so what happens is that now you see a lot of BI tools, Power BI, Tableau, where you can go ahead and say, ask your question, right? That says, give me, or what was the sales for this quarter or something like that. So I don't actually have to look at the dashboard, find it out in that dashboard. It will just go ahead and give me the answer right away. Does Lexio or does narrative science, how does that fit in or within data storytelling, or is that something a little bit different or so?
Yeah. So that's Q3. We'll have that live in Lexio. That kind of natural, thinking of it as a natural language query interface. And we have prototypes of like chatbots. You can open up Slack and say, "Hey Lexio, how many deals did we make last week?" And it parses that. And because for parsing natural language, for actual NLU, natural language understanding, one of the nice things we found is that because we have like a real honest to God NLG engine, a lot of the NLU stuff, we can just run the engine in reverse. And so we can understand like what pronouns you're referring to, because Lexio knows what it would be referring to with those pronouns, that kind of stuff. But for us, so yeah, totally those types of, ask a question and get the answer. It's in sort of the, conceptually, it's within Lexio. It's not physically there yet, but it will be in a couple months. And the thing that's exciting there is a lot of those systems, they're really question and answer. They're kind of one-shot questions. It's how many customers did we have at the end of 2020? And the things, here's the database query I'm going to run, and it runs and says 188. Or it says, last year at the end of 2020, you had 188 customers. And that's cool. That's definitely better than nothing. But if you sort of think about, if you're an analyst and your boss comes up to you, and the CEO, especially these executives that want to use this, and they come and say, "Hey, how many customers did we have at the end of last year?" And you say, "Oh, we had 188 customers," and then you pop your headphones back on and start working again. Like it's a very strange interaction, right? No, the executive is not going to be happy with that interaction. They want more, right? They want to know how many customers we're going to have at the end of this year. How many of those customers have churned? Is the number of customers growing? Are there any particular notable customers? They want to know all that other kind of information. And for us, that's exactly what the authoring graph is. We have all that information already. So as we start to release our own NLQ stuff, we'll be able to do more than just here's the number or here's the number in a sentence, but it's really here's more broadly, here's the kind of the number, here's the question you asked, but here's all the context and the questions behind the questions that Lexio thinks you're interested in when you asked it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So in the interest of time, we're a little bit over, so I'm going to end pretty soon. I've already posted up a poll. So if you can, answer these questions, give us feedback from today's webinar, and then I'll go ahead and share the remaining of the screen. So Mark, go ahead.
Next month's talk is DSP in the cloud, digital signal processing. DSP can be described as operations performed on signals which describe physical quantities that vary in space and time. It's used for telecommunications, instrumentations and control, image and audio processing, consumer electronics, and many other applications. So typically this has been done on hardware. Now it's moving to the cloud. And with hardware devices becoming smaller, we have to see if cloud computing is becoming, can it be practical? Can it deliver the same sound and video quality that hardware has done? So our talk next month is going to be talking about these beginning stages of DSP in the cloud, such as Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud, how they're addressing DSP. The talk will also give you some historical background on DSP basics and its current state and technological applications and what we could be looking forward to. Our speaker is Terry Grossheim. She's the lead technologist with Booz Allen Hamilton. She's had an interesting career, first starting in recording technology, music recording technology, with a very interesting background, then got into software development, finally into an MBA program, and putting that all together, went to work for a startup, Wave Machine Labs, and the DePaul University School of Music, more in IT, and currently she works at Booz Allen, putting that all together with especially a lot of Apple, iOS, and other similar situations. It's going to be on June 16th, 6 p.m.
Yes, and also you can see that's the meetup. So the meetup page is already up and available, so you can start to register for that event. Thank you, Mark. Also as well, I will want to say regarding about the IEEE Computer Society Chicago chapter. So we have our next talk, which is we have a Computer Society distinguished lecturer from IEEE. His name is Dan Shoemaker. From University of Detroit Mercy. and he will be talking about secure sourcing of COTS products in the context of supply chain management. And since this is an IEEE Computer Society talk, but of course, ACM Chicago members and Mid-America Club IT Connect members are also they're welcome to come and attend as well. You can register right now if you go to bit.ly/IEEE CHICS 0621. A copy of these slides will be made available after the recording, so you will have access to that. And also as well, we are looking for more people to help to join our ACM Chicago board. So we're looking for people who are enthusiastic and want to help with ACM Chicago. So if you've been attending regularly and you want to help out or so, volunteer your time, we welcome you to let us know regarding about this. So there are opportunities to develop complementary skills in writing, in planning, especially when we are beginning to go back to in-person events, videography, audio, and editing, as well as networking, trying to find future speakers and topics for our events, and also generally to help build an interest to computing to also other people who may not be computer science literate. So some of the opening positions that we have here, if you're interested, is that we're looking for like a media communications chair. So this particular person would be responsible for, advertising our meetups and on social media, in our mailing list, just getting the word out. We're also looking for a chair to do audio video coordination and meetings. When we have in-person events, setting things up. Also a networking chair, so being able to have recommendations of particular speakers and topics for throughout the year. Also as well, vice chair. We also would like to find someone who can be able to liaison with the many different ACM student chapters that different universities have. So if you're interested in that as a student chair, we'd love to get young people, young blood students to come on board and give us new ideas, freshen up our ACM Chicago meetings, and also as well treasurer. So if you're interested in any of these positions or helping out with ACM Chicago, you can reach out to us, vice chair at chicagoacm.org. or chair at chicagoacm.org. And also as well, if you yourself want to become a speaker, you have something interesting you want to talk about, or if you know of someone who might be good to speak at our event, please also contact us as well. All right, so with that, thank you everyone for joining this evening. And like I said before, a copy of this recording, Nate's slides, and the slides that I have here from the introduction will be made available after this webinar. And hope to see you at a future webinar for in June. And everybody stay healthy and safe and have a good evening. Thank you.